let's keep going now. We're going to move on and try to, I'm not sure we're going to finish it up today. We're going to try to finish up on this general evolution topic that we've been going over. Now, in the weeks prior, just to recap, we first went over the basics of what does evolution mean. Why is it a religion and not considered actually part of science? Now, there's people that want to say it's part of science, but it's really not. We went over how they have no idea what a species is, and many very educated evolutionists have admitted that. There's different evolutionary dictionaries online that have been honest about that and said we don't really know. Then we went over what the geologic column is. We also went over the radiometric dating and how that radiometric dating is used to date nothing because the real source is the geologic column. It's all these different layers built up, and how most of the Earth does not have anything concerning the geologic column whatsoever. The geologic column is not actually found on Earth. But today we're going to go over the fossil record and circular reasoning here. Now, the fossil record issue was one I had on a separate article. I merged it into this one, so Tim, there's a second one I actually merged into this. But the old page is still up there for people who had linked to it, so it will divert them to this particular, or it should divert them to this particular teaching. I'll have to double check it and make sure I did it right. But anyway, the fossil record is based on pure circular reasoning, and we're going to talk about that because that's why we were prepping for this in previous weeks. When we talked about the geologic column, we talked about the speciation and the radiometric dating. All this is building up and leading to this. So I'm going to quote from an article from Carnegie Magazine called The Fossil Record and Evolution. It says, quote, "Locally, journalist Jack Kelly of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette wrote that the fossil record does not support evolution. Nothing could be further removed from the facts. Understanding the fossil record produces awe at the magnificent unfolding of life through the immense sweep of Earth's past, an appreciation for the present, and certainly a continuing change in the future." End quote. Okay? So this fossil record is upheld with awe. They're supposed to look at it as if it's a god. This is just more and more proof for their religion, okay? This is how they're viewing it. Again, the geologic column is their Bible. Everything has got to match that geologic column, and so the fossil record is putting in conjunction with that geologic column, okay? It's part of it, and we're going to see what they're talking about here. But I want to give you a few more quotations just to show this is exactly what they're referring to. This is from about.com. You can actually look up questions, things on there, but it's an article by an author named Austin Klein about fossils and evolution. It says, quote, "In general, the fossil record is consistent with the development order suggested by looking at the characteristics of living species." Again, they don't know what a species is, but they're going to use the term anyway, as if they do. Continuing, he says, "As such, it represents another independent piece of evidence for common descent, and a very significant one, since the fossil record is a window to the past." End quote. So they say the fossil record is how you look at the Earth's history, right? And all this, again, is flying in the face of what the Bible tells us the historical record actually is, right? So somebody's wrong here, obviously. This is from a book called Advanced Biology. It says, quote, "Perhaps the best evidence in favor of evolution is the fossil record. The most direct evidence for evolution derives from paleontology, the study of fossils." End quote. Here's one more this is from an evolutionary professor of biology at Duke University in a book called Philosophy of Biology and Anthology. It says, quote, "In fact, one of the strongest sources of evidence for evolution is the consistency of the fossil record around the world." End quote. Okay? So when you ask an evolutionist in general, okay, well, prove your theory to me then. What's your best evidence? They're going to point to the fossil record 99% of the time. Okay, because that's what they're taught is the strongest evidence for evolution. So let's take a look at this, okay? Basically, you've got a bunch of creatures they will find in the ground, and then they list them in an order, particular order, they think they evolved. This is exactly how it's done. There is no complex method to this whatsoever. All they do is they just list them out in a particular order based on how they think it happened. And they say, well, don't they do it based on similarities and things like that? Depending on what you call similarities. Because I listed these out, the order of which they would have evolved, according to a lot of sources. When you want to go from fish to amphibian to mammal to reptile to bird, because that's the way they go, this is preposterous on so many levels. But it's what they believe because it's a religion. All right. So one of the things I want to point out here is because what they say that they're going to dig in the ground and they find one creature is buried under another creature. Then the creature under it evolved into the creature above it. But this is like saying if I get buried on top of a hamster, that means he's my grandpa. That's not true, okay? That's ridiculous. It's a totally ludicrous idea. So we're going to look at some of the presuppositions of this, and one of the best ones I found to give was this one about the trilobite, okay? If you want to follow along, if you're listening by audio recording, you can follow along by typing the word evolution into the search bar at creationlimited.com. You'll pull up an article called Evolutionism, Another New Age Religion, and then you can click on the section called Fossils of Record and Circular Reasoning, and that'll take you down to where we are. You can follow along and look at some of the images that go along with this. Or if you're listening by YouTube, just click on the link, it'll take you there. So the trilobite was said to go extinct probably about 500 million years ago, is what they say. 500 to 600, but who cares? Let's call it 500 and be done with it. So this textbook, it says, let's review Earth science, the physical setting. It says, quote, the best index fossils include swimming or floating organisms that evolved rapidly and were distributed widely, such as graptolites, trilobites, and ammonoids, end quote. So they say the best fossils they have in this fossil record. And they call them index fossils. Okay, an index fossil is a marker. They say, okay, if you find this index fossil, then all the stuff around it is supposed to be, 500 million years old. That's what they're using to date some of these things, okay? So they'll use it to date certain layers. If they find this in the rock, this is what we're going to date this layer at such and such million years old. Anyway, continuing here. Here's another one for this is another textbook called Modern Earth Science. It's called Biology. It says, quote, trilobite fossils make good index fossils. If a trilobite fossil such as this one is found in rock layer, the rock layer was probably formed 500 to 600 million years ago, end quote. So just so you know that this is being generally taught all over the place. This has been taught for many decades that the trilobite went extinct 500 million years ago and it's an index fossil, okay? But the problem is that they've been found alive. There are a number of people that have found trilobites still alive today. They did not go extinct. And that means if trilobites are still alive today, couldn't they be found in any rock layer? And then they'll say, well, why do we only find them in these specific layers that are 500 million years old? Well, you see, you're presupposing that those are 500 million years old. And I'm going to show you the parlor trick that they do to get people to believe in their dates. It's amazing the kind of illogical, like logically fallacious trickery that they will use to make people believe this junk. Now, one of even the picture that you're seeing on here, if you're looking at the website, this is actually from Kent Hovind provided this, and a lot of people still point back to drdino.com. Look, Kent Hovind is not part of drdino.com anymore. If you type in drdino.com, it'll take you to the Levin Ministry Creation Today, which is run by his son, which is 501c3 incorporated, and then they're into a bunch of junk that is totally leavened. They're pagan witchcraft rituals and all that stuff. They get into all that kind of junk, okay? And I pray, Kent Hovind is supposed to be released from prison next year, and I pray that he does not get involved in that junk. I really hope that he doesn't. His website right now is secondpeter3.com, because I really don't want to have to pull support of him. I mean, if he gets involved in that stuff, we have to sanctify ourselves from that kind of thing, and I really don't want to have to do that, but I will if he gets involved in it. Anyway, continuing here. Now I've got the audio clips. I actually want to open these up and let you listen to this. This is, I had made a video, and some of you guys saw it, from a show that Kent Hovind had on his radio program, and there was this one caller that would keep calling in. His name is Jared, and he called in many, many times. You can actually type in on places like YouTube, Kent Hovind Jared. There's tons of videos where this guy had called in and they had talked with him about numerous issues. But this was one of them where they had mentioned these trilobites, and I thought it was worth listening to on here. I'm going to go ahead and play this, and we're going to listen to it. And we'll stop it as we go through it and make some comments.
You have these fossils in a very specific pattern. No, you don't. First of all, it does not make any sense to flood. Okay, who taught you they're in a specific pattern? Now, that's where you got lied to. Okay, they are in a specific. You never find trilobites with hominids, for instance, as you need to come pointed out. Now, if you did, what would that matter? We find specific patterns. No, you don't. First of all, it does not make any coelacanths with hominids. Still alive. So, all you would say is, so you found a trilobite with a hominid. Coelacanths are still alive.
And it's not just 65 million years on there. I've got different textbook quotations on our website. The coelacanth is a lobe-finned fish that they said went extinct 325 million years ago. But they were found alive off the coast of Australia about a century ago. So, and this lobe-finned fish thing that was supposed to be the representation of everything, the lobe-finned fish evolved into the amphibian and went onto land and all this stuff, because they said these lobe fins actually grew into legs. That's what they believe, okay? It's ridiculous. It's totally preposterous. I mean, but this is what happens with preposterous religions, okay? You have, all this, Mormonism, Scientology, all these cults out there. They all do similar things like this. They make the most absurd statements, but they believe in them with faith. And I admire their extraordinary faith to believe in these things. I just don't have enough faith to believe in that. It's unbelievable how much they believe, really. So let's continue here.
It doesn't matter if we find a trilobite. I think they got isolated in a particular part of the world. Now, you could say the same thing for any trilobite. Your whole argument about the trilobite found with the human or hominid fossil is irrelevant, because if we found one, you could say, oh, who cares? That can happen.
So what he's saying here is, like, it doesn't matter, even if we found, they say, okay, if you found this fossil and this fossil together, it would disprove evolution. I've heard so many evolutionists say that. But then when it comes time that we actually find them together, what do? They write it off. They'll say, that's not really what that is, or they didn't use the right equipment to excavate it, or the right people weren't analyzing it, or if you find them together, something like that, it'll say, well, that just provides a minor problem, or it's just a mishap or an accident. Okay, so what they do is they go back on it. It doesn't. They try to make it seem like it's falsifiable, saying you find this, it would disprove evolution. No, it won't. Okay, because it's a religion. It's not falsifiable. That's my point. So let's continue to listen to what they tell him about the trilobites here.
Trilobites in the same that explains hominids, you would turn the theory of evolution upside down.
Now, to make sure you understand what he's saying here, if you find trilobites with hominids, a hominid is anything that would be, have arms and legs and things like that would be walking upright, what they would say monkeys or human beings or things like that, right? That's what they're referring to. So he says, if you found those two together, he says, you would turn the theory of evolution upside down. Well, what if they're found alive? Supposedly, it's supposed to turn the theory of evolution upside down. Now, that I know that's not true. It wouldn't. It wouldn't faze him for a second.
Wonderful, rich guy. They probably said about coelacanth. Hold on. We had some. Hold on. Let me count this. The trilobite is one of the most ancient creatures on the face of the earth. It's Cambrian era. We had some sent alive to us a month ago. A trilobite? They're in my museum. They died. No, sir. No, you're lying. You need to come down to Dinosaur Adventureland. Look at this. Jared, do you see how adamant you are? It doesn't matter if we found one. You are saying something that is false. Hold on 1 second, dude. And first of all, you can't say it's false that none of them are anywhere with a human, because you don't know that. You just we never found any. Well, okay, well, then you don't know that it's false. Let me make one point here. Jared would have made the exact same reaction in 1938 when they found the living coelacanth. He would have said, you are lying. There are no coelacanths. They've been dead for 325 million years. Our theory predicts it. He would have been just as dogmatic on the coelacanths. So, I'm sorry, you're the one that's mistaken. But there has been so much room in the geological column for trilobites to show up again. The Cambrian is like the second earliest rock layer, according to what somebody taught you. Cambrian, pre-Cambrian, it doesn't get much lower than that. We're talking like birds of shale creatures. I understand what you're talking about. A million years old. No, that's what you were taught. That's how I science myself. The Cambrian layer doesn't exist. It's the whole geologic column. The whole geologic column doesn't exist. They find a layer of rock, and they name the layer of rock based on the types of fossils they find in it. They honestly believe.
And by the way, that's what we're going to discuss today.
If you found a trilobite, okay, you said you have, but I mean, don't you think that if you found a trilobite, that you would at least upset some evolutionists? You're upset. No, I'm upset because you're parading around false evidence. I really don't believe you. That's the trilobite. I don't believe you. You would have to prove it to me. Oh, I'm sure I would have to prove it to you, and just like I would have to prove the coelacanth, 50 years ago. No, hold on. Or the living dinosaur. The coelacanths aren't that old. 65 million years old. No, yeah, they're over a couple hundred million years old. First of all, hold on. The coelacanths that are living, the so-called living fossils, are not the same coelacanths that are in
Do you hear that? It's like, okay, they're not the same thing, but they are the same thing. It's the same exact thing that's in that they find in fossils of.
Dead ones are dead, and the living ones are living. So they're not the same. They are. And it doesn't stop there. You have the woolly pine tree. You have the tuatars. You have so many different types of quote living fossils that just don't show up between there and here. Yet they're here. And why does it take so long to find them? Why does? Well, who's doing the looking? Somebody with a government grant out there to prove evolution is looking. He doesn't want to find something that upset his grant money. Man, he's got to pay for his Porsche. What I'm trying to say is that these things that we think go extinct, we think today went extinct because they're very hard to find. They get isolated to small pockets on the earth, and humans don't, go out looking everywhere. So like, okay, so are you at least willing to entertain the idea that maybe there was a small pocket of trilobites somewhere on this earth? If there were, not if there were, are you at least open to that possibility? I'm open to the possibility, but here's what would happen. Well, you were just saying it's a demonstrable fact that they're not alive today. No, okay, I wasn't.
So he just contradicted himself. He just said, it's demonstrable fact, no way. But now he's like, well, I'm open to that possibility. Okay.
You can't know something like that. You'd have to be every place to know that. I don't think that what you think is a trilobite is a trilobite. But if it were, I think that I would have heard about it by now from like every news source in the world.
So you see what I was just saying earlier. He says, well, that's not what that is. They will always deny anything. Whatever they said, well, this is going to, break apart the theory. They will deny it until they have some excuse to write it off. When they have some excuse to write it off or fit it somewhere else in their geologic column, then they're okay with it. Again, this is handled exactly like a cult, exactly like a religious cult.
That would be the most shattering blow to evolution. No, in 4 years, no problem. Think about what you're saying.
You see what the co-host with Kent was saying here. He's like, no, he said, just give it a few years, they'll be okay with it. Now listen.
Evolutionary theory is old. It's 65 million plus years old. What's the Wallaby Pine? The Wallaby Pine, I have no idea how old that is. That sucker's old too. And they're not long before it's still alive in Australia. First of all, the coelacanth that we have today that we found is different. It has evolved. It has evolved the same. It's just not changed very much. And they have an explanation for that. Of course, it's so well adapted to its local environment that it didn't need to change very much. There was no selective advantage towards change. Which is what the story would be for any trilobite or any trilobite-like creature. The trilobite is so... We've got a break right now.
So anyway, they go to a break, and that was towards the end of that show. Now, the other one was an episode later. I don't know if it's a week or two later. He calls in again, and I want you guys to hear what his reaction is this time.
I do want to make one point, and that is about the thing with the trilobites before that I was talking with Jonathan and you about. I'm going to give you a confession. The statement that I made about trilobites existing today, being a very serious challenge or really upsetting evolutionists, I'm taking that back. So if they found living trilobites, that still would not change evolution theory? What it would do is it would cause a minor problem in ways that... but it's not completely unembraceable, is what you're saying. Exactly, and Jonathan and you were making that point, and I was wrong and you were right, and that's all I wanted to say about that. I was being a little bit too dogmatic about it. Well, come on down, I'll buy you chicken parmesan and we can talk about it over dinner. There you go. I'm vegetarian, sorry. I'll buy you a vegetarian chicken. The chickens ate vegetables, that's how they corn. I mean... But anyway, what I wanted to say about that was that if they discovered trilobites living today, it would be a problem in the sense that it would demand an explanation for why we're not getting signals from them in the geologic column. But it wouldn't be a falsification point. Okay, why did we not get signals of coelacanth for 325 million years?
Now this part's important. I want you to get this. I know I'm just letting this play through because this is. I mean, you see where at one point he's like, no, that would disprove evolution. So I can tell you for absolute. No way that it can possibly be true. And now he comes back on and says, well, we're okay with it. Whatever. That doesn't bother evolution whatsoever. This is totally religious fanaticism you could see in this. And how, but you see they're blinded to it. And they're going to be blinded to it until they come to repentance, okay? So, anyway, what he's asking is why, he says, when they found the coelacanth, okay, back in 1939, I think it was actually found prior to that, but the documentation for it, I don't think came around until 1939 anyway. So he said, why haven't we seen coelacanths? They want to say, okay, 325 million years ago they lived. Why is it for 325 million years there's no record of the coelacanths? Or if they want to say, 65 million years, that they died off when the dinosaurs died off, supposedly. That's what their whole theory says. Okay, for 65 million years, why is there no record of coelacanths? And so here is his answer as to why they don't find coelacanths even though they're alive today.
Yeah, I actually talked about an evolutionary biologist about that very recently, in fact. There's good reasons for that. There is, as far as I understand, all deep-sea marine animals are poorly represented in the recent geological strata.
Okay, what he's saying is all deep-sea mammals are poorly represented in the recent geological strata. That means in the upper layers that he, this imaginary, because it doesn't actually exist on Earth, but in these imaginary upper layers he has, he says the mammals are poorly represented, which means they aren't there. Wait a second. He asked them, why are coelacanths not there in past 65 million years? Why don't we see any? His answer was, because we don't see any. Okay, that is just his exact answer. But you see, they say it in a way that sounds very prestigious and very complex, and the average person misses what they say. That was no answer. Why aren't they there? Because they're not there. Okay. That is ridiculous. And so anyway, I wanted you to hear, but the reason I wanted to play that for you, and again on the website you can hear a video of that. I've got video on there where you can listen to it. But you see, the reason I wanted you to hear that, because I want you to hear some live examples of people saying these things, okay? Because I don't want you to just take my word for it that this is what they say, even though I've talked with a lot of evolutionists, and those of you who have talked to evolutionists can verify what I'm saying here is true. These are the kind of reactions that they give to this stuff. But you see, they're so religiously zealous that it doesn't matter what you show them. Which is why I tell people, even though I'm covering this, I'm not covering this for the purpose of you taking this and trying to convert somebody off of this evidence, because it doesn't matter what you show them. It doesn't matter anything that you show these people who believe in evolution like this, because they will believe it anyway, despite what you tell them. They will find an excuse. And this is what happens with all religious cults. They will always find an excuse to believe whatever they want to believe. Okay, I want to show you some examples of this circular reasoning happening live in the textbooks. Okay, right here on the screen. So if you're following along, this is a Glencoe biology textbook. And it says, quote, fossils in the lower layers of sedimentary rock are older than those found in the upper layers. Okay, and this is what they're explaining here is exactly what I said earlier. If I get buried on top of a hamster, therefore he's my grandpa. That's ridiculous, okay? But this is what they believe. It continues and says, often the layers of rock can be dated by the types of fossils they contain, end quote. So what they just told us is that they date the rocks by the fossils. Now that was page 306. And when you go to page 307 in the same textbook, the next page, it says, quote, scientists have determined the relative times and appearance and disappearance of many kinds of organisms from the location of their fossils in sedimentary rock layers, end quote. What they just said was that they date the fossils by the rocks. Page 306 says they date the rocks by the fossils. Page 307 says they date the fossils by the rocks. That is called circular reasoning. Definition of circular reasoning is a use of reason in which the premise depends on or is equivalent to the conclusion. A method of false logic by which this is used to prove that, and that is used to prove this. This is exactly how it's done, folks. Let me show you again. This is a World Book Encyclopedia, and they said, quote, paleontology, that's the study of fossils, is important in the study of geology. The age of rocks may be determined by the fossils found in them. But if you went to look up how they were dating, because what they said there is that the rocks are dated by the fossils. Okay, they use the fossils to date the rocks. But if you go look up this in another section in their books, they say, quote, scientists determine when fossils were formed by finding out the age of the rocks in which they lie, end quote. So the first place says that they're going to date the fossils by the rocks. The second one says they date the rocks by the fossils. Here's another one I just recently added. This is a high school textbook that's used here in Indiana. General Science from AGS Publishing. It says, quote, to find the age of a fossil, scientists find the age of the rock in which the fossil was found, end quote. So they're dating the fossils by the rocks, okay? The very next page, because that's page 299, go to page 300, it says, quote, some fossils called index fossils can be used to establish the relative age of rocks that contains these fossils, end quote. So page 299 says they date the fossils by the rocks, and page 300 says they date the rocks by the fossils. This is taught uniformly all over the world, not just in America, okay? This is, I mean, you run into these evolutionists, you have live discussions with them, and they're going to claim that the fossil record is consistent. Even though, we saw quotes at the beginning of this section, when I read over these quotes that are asserting that this fossil record is consistent, these index fossils are true, it's the best thing we can use, the whole thing's a complete illusion. It's not true. It's all based on circular reasoning. Because when they say this index fossil, this is a good index fossil for this, well, how do they know the age of that fossil to make it an index fossil? They know it by the rock layer it came in. They found it in. Well, how did you know the age of that rock layer? Well, some people are going to say, we know it by radiometric dating. No, because radiometric dates are cherry-picked based on the age that they find it in the geologic column. The way they know the age of that rock layer is because of the fossil they find it in. It's pure circular reasoning. The whole thing is made up from imagination. That's a hard concept, especially for those of us who learned this in elementary school and high school, for us to understand and to grasp that, wow, this type of circular reasoning has made it into our science textbooks? Absolutely. Okay? And I just demonstrated it to you. You don't have to take my word for it. Go check it out yourself. Go find your local public school textbooks and look up the fossil record and read about it. And see if you can find this yourself. So if you look at this image I've got here, I'll show where there's layers of rock. You're going to find different types of rock and different types of layers, okay? Limestone, shale, sandstone. Then you'll find another layer of shale, another layer of sandstone, then some more limestone. This is how it works, okay? There's all sorts of different layers. There's a big mixing to the layers. And so if you find a layer of limestone, how do you know if it's limestone from the Permian era, which was 240 million years ago? Or how do you know if it's limestone from the Cambrian era? That's what the guy on the audio recording I played for you, that's what he was talking about. He says they're Cambrian, those trilobites, they're Cambrian, 500 million years ago. Okay, how do you know if you find limestone in the ground that it's limestone from the Cambrian era? Or what if it's limestone from the Jurassic era? How do you know that? They don't. They look at the fossil to determine that age. Okay, I'm trying to get that through to people. That's how they find these things out. There was a debate video that they have where Kent Hovind went to University of California in Berkeley. To study or teach at Berkeley, you pretty much have to believe in evolution for the most part. Okay, they don't allow teachers to teach at Berkeley unless you believe in evolution. Very, very heavily evolution crowd. Okay, where he went and he was basically I think they invited something like 160 professors to debate him. Nobody would do it. They all believe in evolution, but not one of them would stand up and debate it. Yet there was a number of them that showed up in the crowd, but they wouldn't come and debate him. So what he did, he spoke for an hour, and then he had Q&A with all the students in there. So this one student, very arrogant guy, gets up, almost really elitist, I got the sense from him as I listened to him. But he said, quote, "You will never find a whale in the Cambrian layers. You will never find any mammal in the Cambrian layers. You will never not find a bird in the Cambrian layers," end quote. Okay, so he's saying you're never going to find these in a Cambrian layer. Now I'm going to show you the parlor trick that they use here. Okay, because the question is, who is labeling it Cambrian? Again, if you find this layer of limestone, how do you know if it's Cambrian limestone, Jurassic limestone, Permian limestone? How do you know? They based on the index fossil. Okay, so what happens is that if they find a layer and they're digging up fossils out of it and they say, this layer contains this and this is Cambrian. But then they find other things that contradict that around it. They will change it and it will no longer be Cambrian. You see, whether or not it's Cambrian is depending on the index fossil. Okay? So what they do, let me show you this type of logic. This would be like arguing the following. A detective believes Bob would never shoot anyone. Okay? Bob, he would never shoot anyone. The detective finds someone was shot, and the detective immediately concludes Bob is innocent. Well, you see, that's not logical. That's not scientific. That's not how investigators approach matters of inquiry. In a logical argumentation, it's called the fallacy of assumption, in which the conclusion is based on the assumed premise. We assume this to be true, therefore our conclusion is proven. But it's not. That's not how detectives work. They don't say, well, this guy's innocent because I know he would never shoot anybody. That's not how that works. All right. So this is the parlor trick that they use. Whether or not they find it's whether or not it's Cambrian. Well, we're just going to decide based on what we already believe that it is. It's not based on any real evidence. That's what I'm trying to get people to understand. They're first assuming that you're never going to find any of these mammals in a Cambrian layer, and so if you find any of these mammals in a Cambrian layer, therefore it's no longer Cambrian. Okay, that's the trick that they're using here to fool people into this. It's total circular reasoning. And in the American Journal of Science, volume 276, they said, quote, "The intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. The geologist has never bothered to think of a good reply, feeling the explanations are not worth the trouble as long as the work brings results." End quote. In case you didn't understand what he just said, I'm going to translate this for you. He basically just said, yes, we use circular reasoning to create the geologic column. However, if these lies get people to believe in evolution, it's an acceptable means to an end. That's what he actually just said. They don't care, and there's a lot of evolutionists that actually believe this same exact way. When they come onto public discussion, like a live stream, like what I'll do on our podcast show, they tend to try not to talk like that. But when you see them on forums, if you ever go into some of these, this is why I never really got involved in creation evolution forums, because most of it is just a bunch of slander and libel back and forth between everybody, where they're just slinging mud back and forth, and I really don't want to get involved in that. But because you get them on a live recording, they tend to try to, because they want to impress everybody, so they tend to try to behave themselves a little bit more. But when you get on a forum, that's one of the things I've told people that is one of the blessings, it's one of the curses and blessings about the internet, is that people actually, their true hearts, because no one can see their face and they're hidden like cowards behind their computer screen, their true heart comes forward more. They actually tend to be more honest about what's really in their hearts, which is why you see so much wickedness and so many hateful messages all over the place, because this is the true nature of people in their hearts. Things they try to not portray to people when they're face to face, but on the internet, this is how they act. So anyway, this is again from the American Journal of Science, that same one, volume 276. It says, quote, "The charge of circular reasoning in stratigraphy can be handled in several ways. It can be ignored as not the proper concern of the public. It can be denied by calling down the law of evolution. It can be admitted as a common practice, or it can be avoided by pragmatic reasoning." End quote. Now, in case you didn't understand what he just said there, let me give you a translation of these. He says, it can be ignored as not the proper concern of the public. He's saying, yes, we lie about our evidence for evolution, but it's none of your business, so you will be ignored. This is the elitist attitude many, many evolutionists have. Now, I've met some who don't have that elitist attitude, but they're very rare, I'll say that, because most of the ones I meet have that exact elitist attitude. Next, he says, it can be denied by calling down the law of evolution. Or in other words, he says, we believe evolution is a fact, so we will deny anything you say against it. He also says it can be admitted as a common practice, which pretty much says other people lie about evidence for evolution, so it's acceptable practice for us to lie too. And then he finally says it can be avoided by pragmatic reasoning. Pragmatic is kind of like practical reasoning or practical application. Okay, so pretty much what he's saying here is we want your children to believe in evolution, and if lying is the only way we can accomplish that, then our lies are justified. That's what he's saying here, just in case you don't understand it. So when approached on the problem with circular reasoning, they just basically close their eyes, and cover their ears and say la la la, I can't hear you because evolution's true. This is how they react, which is why I don't carry on like I don't do email debates, I don't do YouTube debates. I'll have somebody on our show, I'll talk with them about it for about an hour, but I stop. Because there's a certain point that you can't go past, okay? Now the guy, like I told you about, there's one podcast we had, a guy for a couple hours, I talked with him about this. The reason I went for 2 hours is because we covered a wide variety of topics, and I didn't want to stop at that point, okay? But if he wants to cover the same topic over and over, there's a certain point where I say, okay, we're just going to have to stop this or it's never going to end. Because they can't see, folks, they're blinded. They're blinded by a false religion, and we need to understand that they are, okay, and treat it as such. You need to approach the evolutionary subject as a religious issue, and that these people are blinded fanatically by their religion. If you approach them in that manner, you will find that you will waste your time a lot less with them, okay? But I think still that Christians ought to be preaching the truth about some of this stuff and saying, hey, look, this is a religious concept. But what I find all the time is that so many mainstream websites, they approach it as if it is a matter of science. It's really not. It's not a matter of science. It's not a matter of evidence. None of that is really going to convert anybody. Because they are never going to abandon that geologic column. It's their Bible. That's the holy sacred cow. And you don't dare question their holy sacred cow, right? Their golden calf. But anyway, it's whatever an evolutionist wants to say about the so-called, fossil record in quotations is irrelevant after this point. When you show that the very basis of the concept is based on circular reasoning, it doesn't matter what they want to believe about it. It doesn't matter to say, but we have billions of pieces, trillions of pieces of evidence. I've heard them say this too, okay? Well, they'll say, there's a debate with that skeptic atheist Michael Shermer, okay, and where he said, oh, there are just trillions of pieces of evidence. We went to all these museums and we saw these fossils, and he told a story about how he took his daughter and they saw these hundreds of thousands of fossils all over the place. And then he says, and I made a joke that, well, of course, but there's no evidence for evolution, and we chuckled, ha 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 ha. But their entire basic concept of what they're all basing that on is circular reasoning. It's childishness. It's blindness to their religious fanaticism. And yes, they will not see it. Many of them, not only will they not see it, they're not seeing it because they're willfully ignorant. Willful ignorance in the Bible, because that's in 2 Peter chapter 3, when it talks about they will be willingly ignorant of these things. Willful ignorance is not just, because it is, I don't know and I don't want to know. But you see, it's an issue where they don't know, but not wanting to know is also knowing where you can find the truth. They know there are places where they can find the truth, but they purposefully don't go look for it, which means they are just as guilty as a liar. They try to make themselves, oh, well, I didn't lie to anybody. They are just as guilty as a liar because they know they could find the truth, but they purposely don't because they're lazy and they really don't want the truth. That's the bottom line. When it comes to the truth, they get very lazy, okay? They drag their feet. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14 says that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men, and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. These people have doctrines they want to teach you that are false, and they're waiting to deceive you. They're trying to deceive people. Of course, no one would ever admit to doing that. And you see, when they would be honest that they are trying to deceive people, okay, because there's a number of them that will. We could tell you all sorts of stories we really don't have time for today, but there are a number of them that do, okay? At least those people in their hearts, at least they're being honest about it. But there's a lot of evolutionists that won't be honest about it, that they're lying in wait to deceive people. That many of them, you should see, ask them how they treat Christianity. These atheistic evolutionists, and humanists, which we'll talk about in a minute, I might mention in a few minutes here. But they see how they treat the topic of Christianity when you talk about it. And you'll see their true heart come out. They hate the Christian God of the Bible, absolutely. This is the reason they hang on to these ridiculous concepts of circular reasoning, where they have to do all sorts of mental gymnastics to tumble through this tower of assumptions. In Romans chapter 1, verse 21 through 25, it says, "Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations." So all their imagination and vanity in this whole big religious concept that doesn't even exist on planet Earth. "And their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools." Well, again, that's, we're the Homo sapien, the wise man, and now they call themselves Homo sapien sapien. We're the wise man, and one day they will call themselves Homo sapien sapien sapien. Oh, we're the wise man. But professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So just like a cult, people who dare to question their golden calf are completely excommunicated from their church, from their religion. Okay, and excommunicate means to exclude or expel from membership or participation in any kind of religious group. So, for example, in Catholicism, it's acceptable to question the Bible, but it's not acceptable to question the authority of their cult. So they're Catholic church leaders. You don't dare question the Pope. You don't dare question these people. It's okay to question the Bible, but don't you dare question the Pope, right? And likewise in evolutionism, it's okay to question how evolution might have happened, but it's not okay to question if evolution happened at all. You're not allowed to do that. And in the United States today, evolutionism, as I've stated before, is a very carefully protected, state-funded, tax-funded religion that you all are paying for this junk to be taught to the next generation. Now, I put a quote on here. This is from Ben Stein's Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. Now, I'm not saying that I highly recommend this because they focus very much on a concept called intelligent design, which gets into aliens, and there's also intelligent designers of a bunch of different pagan religions around the world. I'm not into any of that junk, okay, and I don't recommend getting into any of that. But that's kind of what he gives a basis on. However, I do applaud him coming forward and showing the examples where people have been fired and lost their jobs simply because they said there's problems with Darwin's theory. You don't dare question it. So this is a quotation from Ben Stein and with an interview with Michael Shermer, where Stein had said, quote, "What if a person published something, say, at the Smithsonian, in favor of intelligent design and lost his job over it? It had been peer-reviewed and published, and then he lost his job over it." Shermer replies, "I don't know. I think there had to be something else going on. People don't get fired over something like that." End quote. Well, ignorance is bliss, isn't it? Complete ignorance is just, oh, we'll just be happy in whatever we have because we're just ignorant of anything going on around us. Well, that's the American way. Apparently, that's the land of the free and home of the slave. Just let's ignore everything and then we'll be happy. Now, the people I'm going to list out here, I'm going to talk about, are not necessarily Christians. Okay, the Christian creationists think that all these people are Christians. No, they're not. Some are, some aren't. But the focus of this section that I put down is simply to put down what happens to those that dare to raise any scientific inquiry against Darwinian evolutionism. Okay? And don't you dare question their religion, all right? This one is from Mark Armitage. This is from the Fox News article on this that was published July 30th of this year, actually. It says, quote, "Armitage, who does not believe in evolution, was lauded by his colleagues and the science community." Now, lauded means applauded. Anyway, continuing here, it says, in the science community, after he discovered in 2012 the largest Triceratops horn ever recovered from the world-famous Hell Creek Formation, on February 12th, 2013, a science journal published Armitage's Triceratops soft tissue findings. Days later, Armitage was fired from his position, end quote. So what they're saying here is that Armitage, he discovered that there was soft tissue in these Triceratops horns. How could there be soft tissue in these from inside them? That's not possible if they're 65 million years old. As soon as he discovered this and published on it, he was fired from his position. Oh, how coincidental, huh? He gets fired as soon as he provides something that would disprove the geologic column, disprove their Bible. This is from Fox News article. It says, quote, "Scientists who study dinosaurs have long believed that Triceratops existed some 68 million years ago and became extinct about 65 million years ago. Armitage's finding, however, challenged that assertion. He argued that Triceratops must be younger, or else those cells would have decayed into nothingness, according to the July 22nd lawsuit filed in Los Angeles Superior Court. The lawsuit alleges that in the weeks leading up to his termination, Armitage's boss, Ernest Kwok, stormed into his lab and shouted, "We are not going to tolerate your religion in this department," end quote. Now, even though he might believe in a young earth, all he's saying is look, there's soft tissue in these, and there's no way that soft tissue could survive for 65 million years. But you see, that's a threat to the evolutionist. And so they will not be tolerated. They must, I mean, of course, you see, cults can't tolerate a different religious viewpoint because it creates too much competition for them, right? If evolution was really part of science, it wouldn't matter what his beliefs are. If this whole process was really scientific, people would be open to different inquiries about the subject. But they're not, because they have religious presuppositions first and foremost. Rod Levake, he's a high school teacher in Minnesota. It says, this is from the article in the Duluth News Tribute. It says, quote, this is from Associated Press, quote, Levake, who was removed as a biology teacher, said his fight is about whether a Christian can teach biology and whether Darwin can be criticized, end quote. Levake confessed to the school board that he had doubts about Darwin's theory. He taught evolution and pointed out the flaws in the theory. So he's teaching evolution as, kind of the instructional materials that they purchase. He's teaching through this, but he's also pointing out the flaws in it. He never mentioned God or religion, and said he had no interest in teaching creationism or making references to God or religion. He's just saying, I have doubts about this, and here's some problems with it, and that's what he was showing the students, to get them to think for themselves. He was relieved from his position because he questioned Darwinian evolution. And so in the court case from Raleigh Levake versus ISD number 656, court file CX 99793, if you want to go look this up, of June 23rd, 2000, this is what the court said, quote, plaintiff, that's Raleigh Levake, plaintiff in this instant case has no constitutional right to teach his proposed criticisms of evolutionary theory, though they may be scientifically meritorious, end quote. Do you understand what that just said? He might be right. He might be teaching these children the truth of the matter, but he has no constitutional right to question evolution. Wow. He needs to take that up to the Supreme Court, because that is horrible. You've got evolutionists working everywhere in the society, even the political arena. Because again, the modern day philosophies on how the government should be run through the socialism and all this is really an evolutionary concept. The nationalist, socialist, which is what we're heading directly into, and the communistic society, that all is centered around evolution, and we'll talk about that another time. We're not going to cover that in this series of teachings on it, but we will get to that eventually, on the dangers of evolution and what the philosophical results of it are. You don't dare question evolution or you get fired. But Michael Shermer, these of the Skeptic Society, he's skeptical of things. No, he's not skeptical of that. No, that can't be happening anywhere. Just, ignorance is bliss. Right? Roger DeHart, he has got a bachelor's in biology, his master's in science education. He's taught for 30 years. And this is from a Los Angeles Times article. It said, quote, DeHart dissected such scientific topics as bacterial flagella, fossil records, and embryonic development. Examine the evidence, he told the students, and ponder the big question, is life the result of random, meaningless events, or was it designed by an intelligent force? End quote. Now, the Los Angeles Times article reported that DeHart never mentioned God in his high school classroom, and he has always stayed within the law by never discussing theological questions. He simply wanted to help students see all sides of the issue and reason for themselves what was true. Now, that's what teachers ought to be doing, at least in my opinion. They ought to be getting kids to learn and to think for themselves, not to be indoctrinated, but to think for themselves. And the way he was doing this, he was passing out current science journals in his classroom, up-to-date science journals, and showing students errors that were in the textbooks. That's all he was doing. From that same Los Angeles Times article, it says, quote, Jerry Benson, a community leader who supports DeHart, said the science teacher was only doing what educators should be doing. And he says, stimulating students to think critically. The intelligent design debate is exciting, Benson said, and I so want that excitement to be presented to our students and cause them to stop and say, well, what do I think? End quote. Get them to be able to think on their own. That's what they ought to be doing, okay? However, despite DeHart's effort to give real education and help students to be able to think for themselves, he was told by the principal that he could no longer mention intelligent design by passing out up-to-date science journals to correct bad information. In the article, the same article, it says, quote, even though DeHart never overtly discussed religion in the class, Beth Vanderveen, Burlington Edison High School's principal, said she had grown very wary of DeHart's real motivations. She said, I don't think it's about showing holes in evolutionary theory anymore. I think it's about getting religion into the schools, end quote. Well, it doesn't matter what she thinks. See, the problem is that she supports evolution, and she doesn't want anybody questioning it. Even though DeHart, he never mentioned anything religious in his classroom. And Roger DeHart himself, WorldNet Daily reported in an interview, he said, quote, if something in science suddenly becomes so sacrosanct that you can't question it, then it ceases to be science, and I really think that's what's become of Darwinism, end quote. Well, he's right. You can't question it or you lose your job, right? Forrest Mims. He's a commissioned officer in the U.S. Air Force. He graduated from Texas A&M University. He's named one of 50 best brains in science by Discover magazine. From a New York Times national article, it says Forrest Mims, Mims, has been a science writer for 20 years. 20 years. But he was denied a job because, look, Mims, he wrote articles for National Geographic, Science Digest, and American Journal of Physics. He has published articles in all these journals. Mims was denied a job at Scientific American simply because he was a creationist. The editor, John Peel, denied Mims a job despite the fact that he had been excited about hiring Mims based on his outstanding work in other publications. This guy writes some very intricate articles. In an audio recording of the interview, Peel said, quote, there's no question that on their own merits the columns are fabulous. He's complimenting his articles, the things that this guy writes. He says, you're a man of honor and integrity. It's in its own right, what you've written is first rate. That's just not an issue. It's the public relations nightmare that's keeping me awake, end quote. He doesn't want to have to explain to anybody that, oh, this guy, he doesn't buy evolution. He's incredibly intelligent, very well experienced, but he doesn't buy into evolution. So, you know, as a cult, you can't let anybody in that actually doesn't believe what you believe, okay? This means it doesn't matter how scientific and helpful the work is. If you don't buy into the evolutionary religion, you're banished from academia. This is how it works. And you can check out his website at forrestmims.org. He has all sorts of documentation of his rejection. They basically, and this, I also published one of the articles from let's see here, what newspaper was it? From the New York Times newspaper, that says, hire a creationist, a non-believer in Darwin, not a proud science journal. You know, that's the title of the article that they wrote about this guy. Kevin Haley, PhD in biology from Purdue University, right here in Indiana, professor at Central Oregon Community College. This is from an article from World Magazine. It says, quote, Kevin Haley was a biology professor at Oregon Community College until the spring when the administration chose not to renew his contract. His only crime, to expose students to flaws in evolutionary theory, end quote. Don't you dare show the holes in the evolutionary theory to students or you lose your job. They said, oh, we're going to choose not to renew your contract. Yeah, right. They're firing him. But they're doing it without having to have a direct firing of him so they don't have to give him any benefits. Oregon Community College, they refused to give any explanation of why they were getting rid of Dr. Haley. That's amazing. You'll find that repeatedly in this. When they get fired over an evolutionary issue, they'll say, well, they won't give any reason for the firings at all. Because again, if they give any reason for it, they're going to end up contradicting themselves and contradicting other testimonies, and they don't want to look bad in the public eye, so they just say nothing. And nobody questions it. So, WorldNet Daily reported, quote, Kevin Haley in Oregon has been criticized by other faculty for questioning human evolution. Haley, who has been teaching biology for non-majors for more than 3 years, told WorldNet Daily new biology textbooks read like sales pitches for the theory rather than presenting a discussion of facts, end quote. He is 100% correct. I have a whole stack of public school textbooks that have been used right here in Indiana back here on my shelf. Okay, I have read through these, and he is 100% correct. They do read like sales pitches. Hey, buy now our theory, buy our religion. Because they're not really presenting any kind of factual discussion over different things. They're really, like I said, they're just presenting things where on one page they'll say one thing, and the next page they'll say the exact opposite, and go into circular reasoning on things. They contradict themselves all the time. I have read, just a couple of years ago, I was talking with a girl that goes to a school, actually the very high school I went to up here in town. And I was talking with her, and she was talking about things that they were going over their textbook. She showed me their textbook. I took a look at it, and they were teaching them carbon dating in there. And they said all the same things that I talked about in carbon dating. They said all these things in the textbook about how this is supposed to work in theory, but showed none of the problems of the reasoning behind it, the circular reasoning behind it. Of course, they never will, because it's a sales pitch. But the article goes on to talk about how Dr. Haley had numerous complaints and attacks on his class and his character. Well, why? There's no reason for that whatsoever. In the article it said, but the college science department's former chairman, Bruce McKelland, wrote a letter recommending Haley be promoted from assistant to associate instructor last month. Well, wait a second. Why is he receiving complaints and attacks on his class when the department's former chairman was saying this guy needs to be promoted for his work? In addition, those religiously that were advocating for evolution tried to lie to get Dr. Haley fired. Apparently it worked. There were female students that came forward to say Haley tends to belittle women by questioning their intelligence. But what they didn't include in this whole case was that he taught for 7 years at the College of St. Mary in Omaha. It's an all-girls school. While he was there, Haley was selected by his pupils to receive the Student Senate Award. His students, these girls, selected him to receive awards at their school for his teaching. All right, we are now having contradictory... These people are coming in and lying about him to try to get him fired. There's contradictory statements here. William Dembski is another one. The president of Baylor University, Robert Sloan, was pressured to fire Dr. Dembski simply because he had advocated in intelligent design as the beginning for origins. Okay. Now, many of these people still may believe in the billions of years of evolution, but they'd say, hey, there had to be an intelligent designer that started this whole process because the things are just way too complex. Okay. I got listed out, I'm not even going to read them all. He's got all these degrees and all this experience in this. Now, they didn't end up firing him, but they were pressuring him. There's documentation I have, but I'll tell you about. They pressured to fire this guy simply because he advocated there was an intelligent designer. You don't dare question evolution for any reason. Nancy Bryson's another one. She has a huge amount of experience in education. Okay, she's taught at college-level chemistry for 20 years. And from the Agate Press, they stated, quote, during a recent honors forum at Mississippi University for Women, Dr. Nancy Bryson gave a presentation titled Critical Thinking on Evolution, which covered alternate views to evolution, such as intelligent design. The next day, Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Von Hansen, asked Bryson to resign from her position as head of the school's Division of Science and Mathematics, end quote. Though, now Hasten, this Dr. Von Hasen, hadn't even heard Bryson's talk. The other faculty members pressured the school to fire Dr. Bryson after they heard her talk. Don't you dare question Darwinism. See, you can't do that or you lose your job. But again, Michael Shermer, no, that's not happening. That's not happening anywhere. No way. And this is a direct quote from Nancy Bryson. From the Agate Press again, it says, quote, I have not received any negative feedback from any students here at MUW. It's all been positive, end quote. Well, she's not getting any negative feedback from the students, and she's helping them to be able to think for themselves, which is why it's called critical thinking. That's what critical thinking is supposed to do. But you see in our textbooks today, and I showed numerous places where this happens in textbooks, where the critical thinking, they'll say things like, boys and girls, how do you think the dinosaurs went extinct? As if this is getting them to critically think. No, it's not. That's a question of, like, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Well, if I say yes, that admits I was doing it. If I say no, that means I'm still doing it. There's a hidden assumption behind that you're beating your wife. Well, what about the option of no, it didn't happen at all? That critical thinking is, do you think dinosaurs went extinct? That would be a critical thinking question, but that's not what's happening here. They're getting to say, dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. You need to believe this is a fact. Now let's question, how did that happen? That's not critical thinking. That's indoctrination. Dean Kenyon. This is a very famous example. Dean Kenyon, where he's got his bachelor's in physics, PhD in biophysics. He's a professor of biology at San Francisco State University. Dr. Kenyon was an evolutionist. Now get this, he was an evolutionist, a poster boy for evolutionists, by the way, for evolutionism. Many people knew about this guy. He wrote a bunch of publications on evolution, and he co-authored a book on evolution with Gary Steinman, another evolutionist, called Biochemical Predestination, which is a textbook that is being used on the subject matter in many colleges across the country. It was, at the time, used in many colleges. Okay? A few years later, after he wrote that book, he made the tragic mistake of getting converted to becoming a creationist. That he doesn't believe in evolution anymore. And he wrote a book called Of Pandas and People. His book simply pointed out that everything is far too complex to have arranged itself on its own like that, like the evolution theory claims, and there must have been an intelligent origin for life. In 1993, Dr. Kenyon was removed from his teaching position at SFSU. He's a tenured professor. When you have tenure, you can't lose your job. You have to do something really extreme to lose your job. Okay? Like you would have to murder people to lose your job. It is very difficult to get fired. But the very fact that he says, I don't think evolution's true, they removed him from his teaching position. They knew they couldn't fire him from the college, and they gave him the job of a lab assistant. A lab assistant is someone who cleans test tubes. This is what college freshmen do. He sued the school and got his job back, but only because he was a tenured professor. They wanted to fire this guy because he wasn't, on board. He wasn't one of the members of their religious cult anymore, okay? And you've got to excommunicate him from the church then. Dan Clark has a degree from Bob Jones University. He also has another degree from Purdue University. And he's a high school teacher in Lafayette, Indiana. Again, a lot of these issues are taking place here in Indiana. There's a big bias here in Indiana on evolution, and part of that is because, again, like I mentioned before, we don't have any kind of law here in Indiana that requires factual accuracy in textbooks, and I think that's a law that ought to be enacted. That would be a great project for someone here in Indiana that has the conviction to get that done. We ought to add that in, so that way we can start enforcing the law on these issues. Dan Clark, from this article from the Indianapolis Star, that's the newspaper up here in Indianapolis, it says, quote, Clark denies that he teaches creationism, but acknowledges highlighting natural phenomena that he thinks are incompatible with evolution, end quote. He says, I'm not teaching creationism, I'm just saying there's problems with this evolution theory. Teacher Dan Clark, he pointed out flaws in Darwin's theory, and he received reprimands from Ed Eller, the school superintendent. When Eller refused to take the reprimand off Clark's file, Clark quit his teaching position. He says, I'm not going to put up with this. The article quotes Dan Clark saying, you can't challenge evolution at Jefferson High. Either you'll be fired or you'll have to move on. Because even if they have this reprimand on there, I mean, if they were to fire him from his teaching position, it would be almost impossible for him to get another teaching position. Because they want to put all these black marks on his record so he can't even get hired anywhere else. That's what happens if you dare question evolution. Okay? Folks, look, this is, I mean, in this country, we don't know the first thing about academic freedom. That's portrayed all over the place on mainstream media all the time, that we have academic freedom here. No, we don't. People at places like Berkeley and all that I told you can't even get a teaching job there unless you believe in evolution, they don't know the first thing about academic freedom. Nothing. They are completely indoctrinated into a religious cult. Now, there are other stories out there, floating around out there, like some of them that have been ruled against and ruled in favor of whoever was teaching the creation position was ruled against, and I actually agree with it. Like, for example, I read a story where there was a guy, he had been fired from his teaching position because he refused to take down, what he did is he put Bible verses all over the walls of his classroom. He was fired from his teaching position, and when he brought that before the courts ruled in the favor of the school that he was fired and that's it. So they didn't rule in his favor at all. I agree with the court's ruling, and actually I'm glad that they ruled in that favor. And you say, wait a second, Chris, I thought you supported the Bible. Oh, I do. But I'm also glad that they ruled against him. Because let's say there was a teacher who was a Muslim in your local public school, and they, in their classroom, they had verses from the Quran all over the walls of the classroom. You would have parents up there in outrage demanding the school fire that teacher. And listen, you guys wouldn't want some Muslim trying to teach all their stuff to your students. You should keep the religion out of the schools, okay? That should be up to the parents to teach their children what they want them taught. However, even though the parents around here, if they were teaching Islam up there, they would be outraged and up there demanding these people be fired, but they teach evolution all the time up here. And the so-called Christians that hang around here, these weak-willed Laodicean mashed potatoes and gravy Oreo cookie people that have no backbone whatsoever around here, because we got a lot of them, they're teaching them evolutionary principles up here, and nobody bats an eyelash. I've tried around here to get these teachings out, and you have a dead community. Completely blinded, completely lazy, completely dead to anything of trying to get anything done around here about these kind of issues. They don't care. Even though we did have one person who was a teacher, I ran into one guy who actually teaches up there, and he actually told me he had appreciated some of the things that I was teaching because of he understood that there were a lot of problems of things that are being taught up there. I had one preacher who did that, and I had one guy who was like an assistant pastor or something up at one of these churches up here who told me that, but I have never heard from these guys again. It's just, you never hear from anyone. It doesn't matter what you do around here. It's just nothing happens because there's people that are so lazy. So again, it's just like they get offended at one religion, but they're not going to get offended at another. Both Islam and evolutionism have done untold evils in this world, have been done in the names of evolution and Islam, both. That's why I call evolution one of the dumbest and most dangerous religions in the history of mankind. This article from the Los Angeles Times says, quote, other scientists report receiving correspondence from colleagues who confess doubts about Darwin's theories, but are afraid to go public for fear of career setbacks, end quote. There are reporters all over the place who are saying there are people that have talked about that they won't come forward and give any testimony about these things because they know they'll lose their jobs. There was a bunch of people, of Ben Stein's documentary, he did, where Michael Shermer says, I don't know, but I think there had to be something else. People don't get fired over something like that. They're getting fired all the time over things like this. And if you go through and watch that documentary, you'll see where he gives numerous examples of people that would not dare show their face on camera. They kept their identities private. It's because they were not willing to come forward and say that they did not believe in evolutionism. One of the guys that even says, you use a creationist viewpoint to get the work done, but you don't dare talk about it because you'll lose your job. And if you lose your job, well, they spent what they got in, tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt getting their degrees. And if they lose their job, well, now they're sitting in debt and they have no way to pay off everything that they've got to pay off. So it's best just to keep quiet about it. Okay. But again, if you look at some of the polls, still today, the majority of the mass majority, the last poll I looked at when I looked at Gallup polls that they did in the United States, only about 12% of the country believes in Darwinian evolution. A larger percentage, I'd have to go back and get the chart I looked at, slightly larger percentage than that believe that the Earth was old. But the majority of the United States still believes that the Earth is young, that God created it within the last 10,000 years. So why is the minority view being taught in our public school system? If we're supposedly supposed to be a democracy, why is the minority view being taught? Because there is a bigger thing behind this whole thing. There's a bigger spiritual battle called Satan versus God. That's why. Okay, Ephesians chapter 4, 17 through 18 says, this I say for and testify in the Lord, that ye henceforth walk not as the other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind. They're so vain in their minds, having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them because of the blindness of their hearts. The Bible doesn't say God blinds them. It does say that, it does say that God blinds them, but what the Bible's explaining here is they're blinded, and God continues in this because they first closed off their hearts, they shut their eyes, they covered their ears, they wanted nothing of the truth. Okay? It's their ignorance because of the blindness of their hearts. There's a Satan versus God in this whole thing, okay? And they keep all their definitions vague. And as we continue here, I try to tell people about how they're trying to turn the word science, which has always, for hundreds of years, meant systematic knowledge gained through observation and experimentation. That's what science, and I quoted that at the beginning when we started this teaching a few weeks ago, okay? But now they're trying to turn science into a way of knowing. Like this guy, John Moore, writes a book, Science as a Way of Knowing. The Foundations of Modern Biology. It's a way of knowing. They keep it nice and vague, nice and spiritual, right? We can know these things. Science is our God. This is from an evolutionist professor of biological sciences at the University of California in a book called Counterbalance. It says, quote, "Science is a wondrously successful way of knowing. Nothing in the world of nature escapes the scientific mode of knowledge, and that we owe this universality to Darwin's revolution," end quote. See, they're treating this like a god. Really, it's time. Time is their god. Well, we don't know how all this happens, but given enough time, it will happen because of science. It's just, they speak about this in such a sanctimonious tone anyway. And really, the reason they have to get into this worship of science is because they really have no way of knowing anything. If you want to find out more about that, just watch our recent podcast where we've interviewed atheists and evolutionists, which all these atheists are coming in there. They believe in evolution as well, okay? And they don't have the first steps in even being able to verify that they know anything at all. Yet they believe they have knowledge. They make statements of knowledge, but they have no way of knowing anything. And we'll talk about that. We'll do another study on that, where I'll do a whole teaching about how to talk with atheists, what atheists actually believe, what their philosophical position actually is, and some of the ridiculous answers they give for things that are just on their ear preposterous. But they have to believe in these things. They have to enter into hopeless circular reasoning because they have no other choice. And so the reason the definitions, they have to keep changing the definition of science from, observation, experimentation, testing to a way of knowing is because evolution does not match the definition of science. So they have to change the definition of science, or at least attempt to do so in order to get evolution to match it. Because again, it's a religious cult. And the claims of macroevolution that we showed earlier, those 5 stages, those first 5 stages, I told you the 6 stages they talk about, they can't be observed, tested, or repeated. So you've got to change the definition of science. So there's some things that they've got to do. First of all, definitions of science, they've got to be vague, so it's open to evolutionary interpretation. 2, they have to, evidence that contradicts evolution must be thrown out so no one can see it, and that's what I was talking about. They're cherry-picking their dates, and they'll throw out any evidence, just like we listened to the trilobite thing. They throw out anything. Well, oh, you have to be lying, that can't be true. So they throw it out and they ignore it even before they've seen it. See, that guy Jared that called into that radio show that we listened to a little bit ago, he denied it, and he hadn't even seen it yet. He hadn't even taken a look at it first. He was answering the matter before he heareth it, because he believes religiously in evolution, and he can't see it. He doesn't see that he does that. And 3, anyone in academia that says anything against evolution beliefs must be silenced. You need to be fired, you need to be removed, you need to be made into a lab assistant to where your voice cannot be heard, because they can't stand the competition. Their theory, their religious theories, are so fragile as they are. They've got to have huge amounts of tax support and grants in order to keep them alive. And they've got to silence anybody, because one wrong word in one wrong place will lead people away from evolution, and they can't have that. Again, evolutionism has created a multi-billion-dollar industry, and all the books and the grant money and everything that's floating around out there, I mean, you can't lose any of that, right? Can't sacrifice any of that. So these are some quotes. By the way, these quotes I'm going to give you are not from creationists. These are from authors and scientists who believe in evolution. This is from Dr. T.N. Tamizian, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. He said, quote, "Scientists who go about teaching that evolution is a fact of life are great con men, and the story they are telling may be the greatest hoax ever. In explaining evolution, we do not have one iota of fact." End quote. Kenneth Sue, this Journal of Sedimentary Petrology, he said, quote, "We have all heard of the origin of species, although few of us have had time to read it." And by the way, I mean, The Origin of Species, I have never read the whole thing through. I've tried. It is such a boring book. He doesn't actually cover the origin of species. He just talks about what he calls speciation, even though he doesn't actually define what a species is in that book either. He's an incredibly boring author. He's also a plagiarizer. He plagiarized all this theory and everything from his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, which I can tell you some facts about him that would interest you, but we're almost out of time, so I want to get through this. Anyway, this guy continues and says, "A casual pursual of the classic made me understand the rage of Paul Feyerabend," who's another person that criticizing Darwin's theory. He says, "I agree with him that Darwinianism contains wicked lies. It is not a natural law formulated on the basis of factual evidence, but a dogma reflecting the dominating social philosophy of the last century." End quote. It starts to make a little more sense based on what we've seen right now. In the past few weeks, we've been teaching on this. Michael Ruse, evolutionary biologist and evolutionist, I've quoted this one to him. They hate this quote. And they say, that doesn't make any sense why Michael Ruse would say that. Well, go ask Michael Ruse then. Okay? He's one of the poster boys for evolutionists. This was in the National Post. It says, quote, "Evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity, with meaning and morality. Evolution is a religion. This was true of evolution in the beginning, and it is true of evolution still today." End quote. I appreciate the honesty of these men, at least coming forward and saying, look, we really don't have the evidence that everybody keeps claiming we have. It's a religious concept. But they go even much further than this. There's a philosophy behind this. I'm only going to speak just a little bit about this, but this is a God-hating religion, evolutionism is. Many of them turn into what you call humanists. The philosophical teaching points them towards humanism, where they start openly denouncing Jesus Christ and declaring themselves the gods of all mankind, the gods of their own universe. In the American Humanist Association published this in the Humanist Volume 33, quote, "But we discover no divine purpose or providence for the human species. While there is much that we do not know, humans are responsible for what we are and will become. No deity will save us. We must save ourselves." End quote. It's all about man saving themselves by their own works. They're going to bring forth salvation. This is from the American Atheist, Volume 20. It says, quote, "Christianity has fought, still fights, and will fight science to the desperate end over evolution, because evolution destroys utterly and finally the very reason Jesus' earthly life was supposedly made necessary. Destroy Adam and Eve and the original sin, and in the rubble you will find the sorry remains of the Son of God. If Jesus was not the Redeemer who died for our sins, and this is what evolution means, then Christianity is nothing." End quote. Now, why is it that atheists and evolutionists and humanists can figure this out, but I can't get this through Christians' heads? That the concept of evolution, there is no compromise on this issue, and many of these people understand that. There's no compromise with the Bible and evolution. They are polar opposites. And if evolution is true, then what's the point of Jesus Christ? Exactly. But they hate Christians because they hate the Christian God of the Bible, and because they hate the Christian God of the Bible, they will hate you. This is how it works. And the New Age apostates and heretics against the Word of God, these people out here, these false converts, calling themselves Christians, they've done much to destroy and dilute the teachings of Christ itself. So when people hear even the term Christian, has been so corrupted by our media and by false converts out there that are teaching all sorts of leavened things that the average person doesn't even have a concept of a true Christian, because they're mostly underground. They're very difficult to find. I'm seeing that. Look, folks, I'm not, I don't like the concept. I don't like the idea myself, but if I wasn't seeing this, I would not be preaching this. I see this so often of people that just put on this show of, oh yes, I'm a Christian, because it's just the in thing right now. It won't be an in thing when they start hunting them. When they start killing them again, it won't be so in anymore. And you're going to see a big dividing line. You're going to see how few really are, and how many false converts are really on the side of the New World Order. I have got to really got to. I found some new quotations about I had not seen before about George Bush stating that all the 501c3 corporations are required to do everything that FEMA tells them to do. I'll have to go back and find some of those because I'm very interested to learn a little bit more about those quotations, but I need to do some more research to get some of those and add those on. Anyway, so that's another topic. But the following book I'm going to quote you here is entitled American Fascists. And the subtitle points directly towards Christianity because it's called American Fascists, the Christian Right, and the War on America. Okay? It's directly pointing towards Christianity, meaning that the author believes that fascism in America is due to the belief on Jesus Christ. Listen to this, quote, "The split in America, rather than simply economic, is between those who embrace reason." Now he's talking about himself there, okay? I just want to point that out. "Those who embrace reason, who function in the real world of cause and effect, and those who, numbed by isolation and despair," now he's talking about Christians, he's talking about you and me, okay, "now seek meaning in a mythical world of intuition, a world that is no longer reality-based, a world of magic," end quote. Well, I can see why he gets that impression when you've got all these people that are celebrating pagan witchcraft rituals in their churches. Yeah, you can see why he has such a focus on magic. However, this God-hating, self-absorbed philosophical mindset stems from an evolutionary upbringing. Because evolutionism, it teaches an unwritten philosophy, which a lot of people keep denying that it does, but it really does, and we'll show that later. We'll cover that another time. But it's apparent in the actions and ideals of those who believe in it, just like I talked about in this quote. But all of it's based on a vagueness and circular reasoning that's made up from the minds of those who childishly hate the rebuke and chastening of the Lord God. They despise anything or anyone that would dare to point out the wicked lust of their hearts, and so they turn to an imaginary illusion, an idea that will help justify themselves as they run and they hurl rocks at the very God who will judge them. Okay, and that's why I've had a number of people that started to pick up some popularity there when I made this image of evolution is just an illusion without the illusionist. That's all it is. It's still these illusions of poof. These things appear out of nowhere, but now we're going to get rid of the evolutionists, which means even being able to explain the magic trick makes less sense than it did before. It's not going to work, okay? Anyway, evolution, they use the same parlor tricks magicians use. Only just in magic shows, there's an evolutionist to explain it. That's the difference, okay? And no matter how many people want to believe by faith that evolution is part of science, it's still a religion by definition and demonstration, and we've demonstrated that in the past 4 weeks. There's nothing about this that's even remotely true or logical or scientific. But yet they will continue to believe in it, and they will gain more and more followers in the world because we are getting worse and worse as time goes on. Because we are getting more wicked in our hearts, and a lot of the reason for that, I have to blame us born-again Christians that have spent so much time, spending time in these church buildings with all this leaven, with a bunch of people who are not born again. We've made the church all-inclusive. It's really our faults. We have got to take some of the responsibility for what we've done here, and so we need to start getting ourselves into a proper foundation, start studying the Word, and getting some truth and rebuke in there. And hey, folks, just like I talked about in the first half, we need to bring the prophets back into the church, okay, to start rebuking and reproving things. But because they're rejected so much, we can't hear the truth. Because they're rejected. Because evangelists, most of the time, get rejected too, as I've said before. It's all focused on the pastors, and many of these pastors are not really born-again Christians. Many of them are so incredibly of the world. They're so worldly in everything they do. There's no sense about them that they're Christians at all. They just think, oh, but he's a really nice guy, But I don't care how nice the guy is. Jesus Christ said, beware of their doctrine. Then when he says, beware of the leaven, and the disciples realized he's not talking about the leaven of bread, he's talking about the doctrine that they teach. Beware of it, okay? And we can, one of the best ways to find out if someone's truly a born-again Christian, find out what they teach. Listen to their teachings, listen to the doctrine that they teach, and then go to the Word of God and compare it and find out if what they're saying is true, which we ought to be continually doing. But this evolution junk, there is no business for this to be in the church, any more than there is for Islam or Mormonism or Catholicism or Jehovah's Witness or Buddhism or any other flavor of weird witchcraft, witch doctor stuff. None of that should be in the church. And we need to get rid of this all-inclusive junk, which teaches all these false religions and false religious concepts. And not to be carried around by every wind of doctrine. Don't be fooled by all the things that they're telling you in the mainstream media, okay? Because the more complex they make it, typically the more simplistic it is. When you peel back all the layers and you find out in the center of the core is this lie that everything is based on. It's what the whole thing, that's the foundation of the whole thing, is built on lies and imagination and fairy tales. Okay, they're fairy tales for grown-ups. Well, that's where we're going to end today. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we end? Well, thanks for joining us again this week, guys. May our Lord Jesus Christ bless you as you continue to study His Word, and we'll see you next week.